question to the panel. You've heard the late night joke about too many white folks, black people, or either minority look the same. How do you teach your officials to do that? If there's a conflict, is the signature alone, if there's a match in the signature, is that sufficient, or do you have to do both? You know, facial and signature.
With the way that the proposal would operate is that they would check the photograph, and if there appears to be a discrepancy, we'll ask you to sign an affidavit saying that you are who you say you are, and then you'll be given access to the ballot. In that way, if there's a question after the fact by the election officials, it can be investigated by law enforcement and ultimately hold those individuals accountable. But we're not putting access to the ballot process through that.
Hi, my name is Randy Rose. I represent Commission G for the Republican Nevada Committee, and they have asked me to specifically ask you, Mr. Secretary, with the voter ID, we're okay with that. Our problem is the diebold's and the way that you can manipulate those. Would you be willing to get rid of those, bring in optical scan machines at a cost of $1.5 million? We can sell those diebold's to other states and recoup that money. Those optical scans cannot be messed with. Would you be open to that? Do you know what I'm talking about when I say optical scan? It's not an eye thing. It's a number 2 pencil. Modernization doesn't always work. We've proven that with the diebold's. So would you be open to the optical scan?
No. And look, here's why. Practically, I'm turning it out. I've only got one election cycle. We're going to use these machines for the next election. So it's going to be up to my successor to determine what the next generation of election administration will look like. Certainly, I think that a paper-based system should be explored, especially if it can save costs. But I remain adamant that I'm proud of the system that we run in Nevada and the election that we administer, and a good reason for that is the use of the electronic machines. We're the only state in the country that 100% of the machines that we use are all uniform. These Sequoia machines that we purchased with a voter verifiable paper trail. So in that way, the public is able to compare the electronic record with the paper record. We've conducted a post-election audit every year since 2002, haven't found a single discrepancy whatsoever.
Okay, is there a question out there for somebody other than Secretary of State? Miller. Raise your hand. Okay, you have your hand raised.
My name is Steve Mossman, and the reason I'm asking a question is for any of you to answer. I do not understand why you all agree on same-day registration of Election Day. We're all we know that there's going to be an election in 2016, so why can't you have people go online or go register or go to DMV? Why do you insist on having same-day election registration when you yourself mentioned how much trouble it is typing it in, putting it in, and so much?
It makes Minnesota and every other same-day registration states the highest voting states in the nation. It means that senior citizens who sell their homes and move into assisted living can go and vote and not be denied. And denying members of the greatest generation their right to vote is something that this nation should take very seriously, because that's what we've been doing. But there are many other advantages. For example, you're registering somebody in front of you. It is so much more secure than paper mailed in or dropped off or dropped from the sky or whatever you do. It's so much more secure to register somebody who's standing in front of you. Same-day registration, among many other things, is also important because we must, in our state, re-register if we move, period. People happen to move on the 1st of the month. That's typical. Elections typically are early in the month. That's typical. And so the process of people being able to actually be honest in saying, I now live here, is actually only possible. What I wonder is, how can a state deny the right to vote, which is in the Constitution, to somebody who's denied because they didn't fill in a sheet of paper and drop it from an airplane or whatever is the requirement of the state? So for us, election day registration is how we do elections. In Oregon, Voting by mail is how they do elections. Each state has chosen a different system, but the state that chooses a system that denies a senior citizen, a member of the military, a citizen who's over 18 years of age and otherwise qualified, the right to vote is a state that's participating in a policy manner in the reduction of their voting turnout. Our state puts a high priority on making sure that if somebody wants to vote, they will not be denied that right to vote. And I'm assuming most Americans who believe in the Constitution, who've raised their arm and sworn their allegiance to the Constitution in some form or fashion, in military service or in public service someplace, or as an election judge, also believes that that right is sacred. And we need to do everything we can. Everything we can. And if you're in a wheelchair, to make sure you can vote. If you're in Afghanistan, make sure you can vote. If you're older, making sure you can vote.
All right, Lee, you want to answer?
I would give a hearty here to all of that. It's largely what I would say. But you know, one thing in your question is we all know we're supposed to be registered. You know, this kind of presumption that the only people who use election day registration are people who are kind of checked out or a different kind of voter. And I would just submit that the facts just don't bear that out. In 2008, those 3 million people who showed up to polls weren't, you know, tuned out voters who heard on the radio there was an election. They were folks whose voter registration form got screwed up, either because of a handwriting error or a government error. They were people who thought their voter registration had been changed by U.S. Postal Service and had not. They're folks who got kicked off the rolls during a purge. In Florida, there were thousands of people who got kicked off the rolls in the last year. A huge number of them were veterans because they had changed their addresses or had gone overseas, and they showed up on Election Day or sent in their ballot on Election Day only to be denied because there had been a clerical error with their voter registration or they had been kicked off the rolls. And I just don't think we're protecting any American interest in telling those folks, these eligible voters, who believe that they're registered, who are invested in our democracy, no, you can't vote. I just don't see a value there. What I do see the value in is exactly as Secretary Ritchie set out, which is these are eligible Americans who have a constitutionally protected right to cast a vote. And the idea that we have rules that were created in literally the 18th century so that you could drive your voter registration via pony down to the county clerk, that we need a 30-day barrier to do that is really outdated. It just doesn't reflect our current modern life.
Keep in mind, North Dakota does not have voter registration. They have one of the finest systems in the country. Many states didn't have voter registration until relatively recently. So the whole notion of voter registration, particularly in the North Dakota model, has no meaning, has no bearing. And I think it's always good to study those other systems and to see how they work.